All right, my friends. So it's 2 o'clock. We are going to go ahead and jump on into our next YOUniverse session. We've had an amazing morning filled with ventriloquism and puppet making, and we cooked up some yummy breakfast and lunch recipes, topped off a little tasty treat at the end for dessert. But now I am superbly excited to introduce a good friend of mine, Stephanie, and her beautiful mother, Kathy. And, you know, they say that the family that plays together stays together, but I'm not quite sure what they say about the family that photographs together. So this next session is going to be this mother-daughter duo, my friends Kathy and Stephanie, and they're actually going to teach you guys how to master the fundamentals of lighting, composition, and angles to produce some buzzworthy photos that might even get you a couple of extra likes on social media. So without further ado, I would love to hand the reins over to Kathy and Stephanie, and they can introduce themselves and, more importantly, in addition to photography, tell us a little bit more about what motivates you, what your 5 to 9 passions are, and what make you tick.
Sure, thanks, Nina. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Stephanie Baiocchi. This is my mom, Kathy, and we are here to teach you some of the basics and fundamentals of photography and a little bit about using those photos on social media and even how to take the perfect selfie, because we all need that. In addition, I'm the director of community and events at a digital sales and marketing company called Impact. And in my 5 to 9, other than photography, I love attending live concerts and shows, baking, and of course, hanging out with my dog.
And I'm Kathy Casstevens, Stephanie's mom, and I've been passionate about photography for as long as I can remember. That goes back to 1973. So that's a long time. And I can't think of a day when I didn't take a photo. I've been taking them every single day for many, many years. So we hope that we can share some fun things with you. And in my 5 to 9, I like to do gardening, and I like playing with Barbies, making Barbie sleeping bags, calligraphy, and basically making my house look pretty for the holidays.
And hanging out in your hot tub.
Well, yeah, that.
We both like hanging out.
Last night I saw this SpaceX satellite.
That was cool.
Yeah.
So we'll dive in. Nina, can you just let me know if you can see my slides?
Yep, all good.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about photography. First of all, like we said, we're a mother-daughter photography duo. We have photographed weddings together, senior portraits, family portraits, all kinds of things. We have a combined at least 60 years of photography experience. We've done proposals, engagements, weddings, families, seniors, and I definitely, and my mom, have done lots of Instagram food pics and selfies. More so the selfies on my end. So let's talk basics. You want to kick things off?
Sure. Well, when you're first starting out with photography and you're using a DSLR, which is not an iPhone or a cell phone, but it's a camera that has an aperture, there's a range that allows light into the lens. The larger the aperture, the more light comes into the lens, and the smaller the aperture number, it changes the amount of light coming in. So the picture would be darker. This is one of the basic things that you need to learn about controlling the f-stop. The next part of controlling photography light is the ISO, or the film rating. This is the film's ability to react to light. The higher the number of the ISO, the more reactive it is to light. So years ago, when I first started out in photography, Kodak's only film speed was 100, which in today's terms is very slow, or it takes a lot of light to make it react. Nowadays, you can get up to 5,000 ISO. So there's a huge change in range. But Kodak came out with a product, ISO 400, and it was its #1 selling film speed of all time. And we'll be talking about that later when we talk about the best place to start. The other aspect of photography, the third of the triangle that you have to know, is the shutter speed. And that is how long is your camera aperture open and letting that film plane be exposed to light. So the rule here is if you have a 60mm lens, 1/60th of a second is the slowest handheld shutter speed you should have. So the longer the lens you have, the faster you have to have your shutter speed so that you don't have blur in your photos.
Unless, of course, you want some blur.
That's right. And when you want some blur, which is a term that I often use where I work at Starved Rock State Park, is silky water. You have to get below a 30th of a second to get this effect, but it is absolutely what you want when you're looking to have serenity in your photos and relaxation and things like that, as well as the saturation of the colors. So you're going to have to get down into the 1/2 second range or even slower.
Now, I know that might sound like, wait a minute, I came here to learn about photography as an art, and that sounds like a lot of numbers. And it's true. I think one of the reasons that I love photography is because I'm both creative and mathematic and analytical. And we found these two images because I think they do a really great job of explaining how each of us thinks about these things. I see photography really as this triangle on the left. I think about the light and the ISO, the aperture and the shutter speed, and how they all play together and how you have to find where you exist in this triangle. You want to talk about your view a little?
Right. Well, I see things more horizontally and linear. And so I show you the example on the right-hand side. If you're going to do a screen capture, this would be a great thing to keep with you. But remember, if you want to make it easy, you can go on program. You can put your camera on automatic every setting and not have any creative liberty with it. We're trying to teach you to swing your camera setting around to manual. And when you do, you're going to find all these combinations. And photography is a lot of math. It's quick thinking in math. So it's really good for your mental state to take pictures and learn different techniques to be able to manipulate the photos through mathematical calculations.
And we've talked a lot about DSLRs and cameras, not iPhones or cell phones, but actually a lot of phones now offer manual settings for these things. I know on my Android, I can definitely go into the camera into professional mode and change the aperture or change the shutter speed specifically. But what we want to tell you here is there's no one right way to think about it. Whichever way to remember these things helps you, that's the one you want to go with.
That's right. So now the next thing here is white balance. When you have proper white balance, your whites are going to be white. Your blacks are going to be crisp and black and not gray. Facial tones are going to be true to color. And that's why being aware of white balance is very important. So it's also very important to understand what kind of lighting you're in. So if you're in a room with tungsten light bulbs in the old days, that'll give you a very yellow cast. If you're in the room with fluorescent light, it's going to give you a very blue cast. So the best way to learn is to put it on auto white balance and then try several settings and see which one works best for you.
This is actually one of the first weddings I ever photographed with my mom, mostly as a learning experience. They got her photos. This is about 10 years ago. So in some of the other photos, you'll see hopefully how far I've come because I thought at the time this was good white balance, and that one in the upper left is definitely not.
One more thing before you move on though.
Yeah.
White balance is always overridden when you're using flash. So if you have a situation where you're using a flash, that particular setting called flash is going to take control and give you automatic white balance. And I highly suggest that you use the flash setting for those moments.
Yeah, flash is V2 of our course.
Yeah. So going back to how to begin, you got to start somewhere. So why not start with the #1 best-selling ISO film speed 400? So take your camera off of manual and put the ISO rating on 400. The middle range of your f-stops is 5.6. It's not really sharp and it's not a lot of depth of field, which we'll talk about later. And the shutter speed is not going to give you motion. So I suggest you start with these 3 settings if you don't know where to begin.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about composition and lighting, and this is how to set up your photo to make sure that once you've got those settings down, it also looks good in the way that everything's positioned. So lighting. I went over for a little walk yesterday and took these pictures. I think they're a great example of lighting because at one point the clouds came over the sun and this middle photo was just far too dark. Then a little bit of sun came and I got the one on the right. And then I actually manually brightened how much light I was letting into my camera and I got the one on the left. And you can see that your photos are going to look much better if they're properly lit than if they're dark. Couple of things. You want to make sure that the light is at your back and that it is on the subject that you're photographing. You've probably heard the term backlit or backlighting. That's when the light is behind you. Even where we're sitting right now, we're facing my window. We have a light above us, but if I had this window behind me, we would probably fall into the darkness. So having that light on your subject, moving around, sometimes adding a light, even just bringing a lamp in if you're not ready to work with a flash or a softbox light or anything, making sure that you get the lighting on the subject. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. One of the things to be very aware of regarding lighting, especially outdoor photography, is when is the best time to go take photos?
Yeah.
And you might think that 1 o'clock on a bright sunny day is a perfect time to take photos. But that isn't true because the light is very harsh and the shadows are unforgiving. If you go on a cloudy day where the light is diffused by clouds, you're going to get a softer, crisper look. And just before a storm, the lighting is very saturated and rich and beautiful. Early morning light as well as late, close to sunset light, the golden hour. That's another wonderful thing, a time to use lighting to your advantage.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's really little, and it's one of those rules that I guess you could say is made to be broken. But it's something I learned, gosh, in like 8th grade, and it's just stuck with me because I've noticed the difference in my photos when I employ the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is when you look at this 9 square grid, it's in vertical thirds and horizontal thirds. And if you can line your subject up on one of those lines, especially where the lines intersect, you're going to get a more interesting photo because the subject is slightly offset from the background. That's not always the case, but a lot of times you don't want to be directly in the center of the photo. A lot of cameras actually have a lot of cell phone cameras actually have a toggle where you can turn on this grid, and DSLR cameras, so you can see it while you're shooting. And then you might notice when you bring a photo into Instagram, which is actually the photo on the left here of my dog Penny, it will bring that grid up and you can crop or zoom your photo to use the rule of thirds and actually position the subject on one of those lines.
Wanted to add one little thing about that, and that is when you're shooting the horizon, such as a sunrise or sunset, you don't want to break the horizon in half. This is where the rule of thirds applies. So you make the sky 2/3 and you make the sunset scene the bottom 1/3.
Nina just said she never knew what that grid 4 was on her iPhone. Now you know. I particularly like that some cameras, especially Androids, I know, even offer you the option to help you use these guides. So this is a screenshot I took of my camera on my phone yesterday. I was doing a little photo shoot with my dog. And you can see that circle up in the left right by her nose says best shot. And it's going to encourage you to line up your shutter there with the best shot. And when you do, you'll get this perfect little photo. All right, moving on to mergers. This is another one of those basic things that I learned right at the beginning. You never want to have it where something is coming out of someone's head. You never want to have them standing right in front of a light post. However, mergers can actually be a fun thing to play with too. So in the case of the photo here on the right, kid with the ice cream cone and the cloud being the ice cream, super cool merger. I'm sure you've seen things of people pushing the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But if you're not careful, as in the case of this poor giraffe, or giraffes actually, this is not a 2-headed giraffe. It is just a terrible photograph of one giraffe with another giraffe behind it. And depth of field. I want to talk about this because it's one of those things that I think people realize makes a photo look good. They don't quite understand why or how. And you can see in this example, and I'll let you talk about exactly how you achieve this, but you can see on the one on the right, the trees are also in focus behind the dog. There you can see each little leaf, but in the one on the left, they're blurry, and your eye is immediately drawn to the thing that is the most in focus, which is the dog. We have some other examples of that.
Okay, go back to the dog for one second.
Sure.
Here's the way that I remember depth of field. If the most depth of field occurs when you have f16 or f22, that means everything is in focus. But if you want one thing in focus, being here the dog, you want to put the f-stop on 1.4, one thing in focus. If you want a ton of things in focus, then you put it on f22. You're going to get a lot of things in focus.
Exactly.
So you understand the depth of field, the range of field here.
Lower number, fewer things in focus.
Yes.
Higher number, more things in focus. Right. Do you want to talk about focal point?
Well, sure. These are both excellent examples of, okay, you're looking at a guy's hand. I don't really care that that's in focus. The roses are nice, but they're not the important part of the photo, nor are the pinheads, but it's a hook. And this little boutonniere from a wedding says, getting hooked or get hooked, and the wedding date. So of all the things in the photo, it's imperative that those letters etched onto that fishing lure are in focus. So definitely in this photo, it's very obvious to see the focal point. On the right-hand side, this was a movie I made about Sasquatch, and I wanted Sasquatch's head on the hiking stick to be the point of focus or the focal point. So some cameras allow you to choose the focal point and say, I want it in that second part of the grid on the top. But generally speaking, you just want to hold your shutter halfway down and it'll focus on where you're pointing the camera and understand that. But being aware of what you want in focus and making it in focus is a true skill that everyone who loves photography needs to master.
And with your cell phone, there's usually a focus, a low focus option. So I know mine's called live focus on an Android. I think it's called portrait mode on an iPhone. That's what's going to get you that shallow depth of field and getting that item in focus. And sometimes something a lot of people I find don't know is it's as simple as actually touching your screen where you're trying to take the photo, touch what you want to be in focus, and your camera will know to focus on that point and blur everything else out, because technology is wonderful.
It is. Let's use it to our advantage. Oh, framing. I think I'll take this one.
Sure.
So elements that make photos stronger are when you frame them with basically natural things that are in the foreground that if you tilt up just a little bit, pan to the right or pan to the left, you'll see some natural element to frame it, such as the branches of a tree, or in the case of the right, the hut roof, thatched roof is hanging down. And it just tells you where you are. It tells you in the left photo, there's a tree here. And in the right, there's natural elements of a tiki hut. And so it lets the viewer understand where they are instantaneously. And that's why framing is so important. If I zoomed in on Stephanie and had just her in a vertical format with no framing at all, you just lose part of the ambiance of the beach scene where there's a rope swing in the foreground and then the roof and the palm trees in the background. So framing is something that you always need to be aware of every time you take a photo. Maybe you need to move in closer, maybe you need to back up, or maybe you need to tilt your camera.
Plus, I just wanted to include a vacation photo because I remember when we could go places. But also, I love the framing of this photo because it draws your eye into me, which is what I wanted people to focus on, but it shows those extra elements. And I had a little room for text. And I want to talk about that because normally in framing, you want to frame a certain part of the photo and put that in the foreground so people look at it. But there's also considering framing for social media. And with my Instagram stories, these are specifically vacation photos, so a lot of them include the sky or the water, but there's lots of times where I'm taking pictures of food or a bottle of wine or a picnic that I'm having, and I want to make sure that I leave room for that caption or that text on my stories. And so when you're thinking about framing, sometimes it might be framing the element that you want to highlight, and sometimes it might be leaving room for the thing you're going to add later. So let's talk about setting up the perfect picture. Now you have your fundamentals of how to light it, how to build it and set it up, but here's how to actually get to where you need to go.
Okay, bracketing is the key word. It's something that no matter what stage you are in your photography, it never hurts to take a photo that's overexposed, underexposed, and then spot on. Because down the road, and now that we have Photoshop and different ways to edit photos, you have a lot more flexibility after you take the photo. But there was a date and time when I was shooting with film, for example, where you only got one chance. But still, there's a nice lesson to be learned, because the more overexposed a photo is, the more trendy it is. And so right now, blown out photos or overexposed photos are the trend. But if when you took this photo the first time, you bracketed, and 5 years from now, when that's no longer the trend and you need that photo, you can go back to the one that's properly exposed and say, yeah, here, this is how it should have been. But just understanding what normal, good exposure is, and then what it looks like to be overexposed by a couple of f-stops or underexposed, it's a great lesson to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly getting retargeted, and I know you are too, for ads for the Light and Airy photography pack for Lightroom or Lightroom Mobile as an add-on. And what it is, it's a collection of presets that automatically ups the brightness, lowers the contrast, adds white, or sharpens the whites, lowers the saturation on all of your photos. And that's cool right now, but might not always be the case. And so it is so cool to not only use bracketing as a technique to learn how these things work, but also know that you're going to have the properly lit, properly exposed photos down the line, which Nina just asked, do you recommend that you know what you want to say before taking the photo so you can frame enough open space in it? Nina, I never know what I'm going to say. All I know is that sometimes I take a photo of something with the intention of sharing that thing. And sometimes I take a photo with the intention of sharing the mood or a sentiment. And if I'm taking a photo of a pink drink, I'm going to highlight the cup and what's in it. If I'm taking a photo of the pool, maybe I just want to share it's a sunny day and blue water, and I'll leave more space. If I can't fit what I want to say, I either find a way to shorten the text or use a different photo.
And my end, I do a lot of photography for print media and to be used within an ad or in the background of an ad. So I always allow room for the masthead of the magazine, the title of the magazine, or on the bottom for the hashtags or the logos.
Definitely. this year's.
Okay, B. Monet is my category. And, you know, Claude Monet was a famous impressionistic artist who would go back to the haystacks and the water lilies year after year, season after season. And why would somebody want to paint the same thing over and over? Well, guess what? It is not the same. And here, this is a place at Starved Rock State Park that I absolutely love called Council Overhang. It looks different every single time I go there. And a lot of people wonder how you can hike back to the same place year after year, but it really does look different depending on the time of day, the time of year, whether there was a lot of rain or not, and so on. So here you see this, and I encourage you to find your happy place. In this case, it's definitely one of my happy places, and go back there. And when you're Monet, just know that you can bring in an element that adds depth to an already good photo and makes it great. In this case, putting a human being in the photo offers scale. So you see how little the human person is in relationship to the canyon itself. If you only saw the cave structure, you wouldn't realize how massive it is. But once you see a human being in there, wow, you really get a feel for it. So I encourage you to go back to your same favorite places over and over again. And you can also watch how your photo skills improve over time.
We enjoy the concept of being Monet so much. My mom let me sponge paint my room pastel when I was little to look like a Monet painting.
And it did.
It did. Oh, that's a great question. Leaf, we'll take some questions like this at the end. For instance, what's the best time to use a flash on my phone? Great question. We'll come back to that.
Mm-hmm. So now a pop of color. There are two ways to achieve this. One is by desaturating the photo in an app or a program such as Lightroom or Photoshop. And then the other way is to have it naturally occur in the photo. So on the left, you see the brooch bouquet where the pop of color just makes it spectacular. On the right, the sunflowers against the natural opposite of the color yellow, which is blue, makes the perfect contrast. And so if you're looking to plan a family photograph or a wedding, it's wonderful to choose colors that are automatically complementary or contrast well with one another.
And sometimes that just means thinking about it in the concept of a black and white photo.
Mm-hmm. Right. So here's Stephanie in some of my favorite photos I've ever taken at a favorite place called St. Louis Canyon at Starved Rock State Park. And I think the one that makes the one on the right spectacular is the pop of color, which naturally occurs in her jacket. So if you're going out hiking, and you know how popular gray is, everybody has gray coats and gray clothes and black. Sometimes you just have to wear color and really bring life to your photos through color.
Speaking of, what's your favorite color to add a pop of?
My favorite color is definitely red. Absolutely 100%. Red is spectacular in all seasons, but especially in the winter. As you can see, her nails are red, her lipstick is red, and her flowers are red. It is, and even the groomsman behind her has a red tie. So that being aware of that little bit of color in your photos makes it spectacular. And kudos to her for choosing that.
Yeah. Let's talk about children and family. Whether you're just trying to take a few photos on your phone, or because we're all quarantined, maybe you can't get a photographer in for those family Memorial Day or Easter photos that you wanted to do, we've got some tips.
Okay, well, first of all, the eyes are the most important thing in any child photo. So you always want to focus on their eyes and be slightly above the subject where they're kind of looking up to you. It makes them look happier and it makes their eyes sparkle. Sometimes with children who have their grown-up teeth coming in, getting a big smile makes an unflattering picture. So I looked at this sweet little boy and I thought, oh, my color balance is off, which it was, my white balance. And I told him, oh, I didn't balance this right. And what I really meant was, you can't smile like that because it's not looking good. So I taught him smirking, what smirk means. Just give me a little closed lip smirk. And so he did. And when you see the picture on the right, it's color balanced and he has a wonderful look on his face. And you can imagine what a handsome young man he's going to be when he gets his teeth and his face grows together, you know, when he matures. But he loved the photo on the right.
Yeah, I love that one. So that's children. What about big families? Like, I don't know, this giant wedding we photographed?
Well, this was on the 4th of July, so everyone was sweating buckets while we were taking this photo. And I can't remember if there were 26 people in the wedding party, but that sounds right. So when you're doing groups, somebody's going to blink. Even in bright daylight, someone will blink. And therefore, if you have 26 people in the group shot, you really need to take 26 or more photos. So you have to put your camera on rapid fire or sports mode to be able to zip that off it's important to have your camera on a tripod so that you don't get nervous taking 26 photos and you're looking at the subject saying, smile, smile, smile. And you're able to pull those photos off in record time. And so with children and groups, speed is of the essence and rapid fire is your key.
All right, we just wanted to take a second too to touch on close-ups, because once you've mastered that shallow depth of field and your focal points, getting what you want in focus and blurring out the rest, it's super fun to get really close up on things that you want to show in detail. For instance, on the right, you have wedding rings on the teeny little baby toes of this newborn baby. On the bottom, you have details of a necklace on a veil from a bride. And then why don't you tell everyone what your photo
Well,
is?
my photo was a spider web. And so it was a spider web on my deck outside, and it was cool, but the deck itself was white and there were railings on the fence. And so it didn't contrast because it was white against white. So I ran in the house and got a black cloth and held it or threw it over the railing or something so that I could have the white against the black. And being aware, just like with the baby toes, of contrast and putting that opposite color underneath your subject is going to make your subject pop. And it's going to give really a lot of vitality to your photo.
All right, let's talk about perspective. I got these beautiful purple marshmallows in the mail the other day because that's what I do during the quarantine, mail order marshmallows. And I was so excited to photograph them and put it on Instagram because I wanted to support this local company, and how cute are these? So I put them on my table with my little spring looking table runner, and I got down real low, got my perspective. I had the light behind me, and I took this picture with the shallow depth of field, and I thought, wow, what a mess behind here. And actually what you're looking at in that photo is the desk where I'm currently sitting. But sometimes all it takes is shifting your perspective. What I wanted to get in here was the purple of the marshmallows, the box with the name, and the cute spring colors of this runner. And so sometimes just changing your perspective. I got up on the couch and stood above my table and looked down and took the photo. Bam, no more clutter in the background, all the colors I wanted, and actually more of the marshmallows. So sometimes it's just about shifting your perspective and getting the right angle. I love this photo because it shows me in my true element, which is being ridiculous and taking fall photos on my phone like the true millennial that I am, with Starbucks right next to me. But I'm just taking a photo pretty straight on in this instance. However, maybe, there we go. Sometimes you also have to switch up your angle. In this particular instance, we were photographing a wedding in Mexico, and there's it's hard to see, but there's a little light up ampersand right above my knee where I'm laying in the sand. And I wanted to get that in the foreground and the bride and groom kissing in the background. And to be able to do that and really get the sand and get the true feeling of what I was going for, I had to literally lay down in the sand. And it's a no-brainer once you start doing it. You know how cool it is to get that angle. I just dropped to the ground at least once during a wedding.
People tease us all the time about how we're dropping to the ground and lying down like you're seeing Stephanie do here, or I'm jumping up on a pedestal or a table. You know, you get actually sore from bending down and getting up so much, but this is the way that you get really emotional photos. That's how you build emotion in your photos.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about details. Details are so important. Here's a few of my favorite photos of details. We talked a little bit about the fishing lure with the wedding date on it. A lot of times, especially if you're doing weddings, but really anything special that you're photographing, there's a detail you want to capture. This ring has a wedding date in it. This bracelet has a wedding date on it. But what's the thing you were just saying yesterday about the other thing that these photos have in common?
Hands. You know, hands they tell a story all their own, and most brides go to great lengths, get it, to have their nails done, or they used to, for their wedding day, and hardly anyone has time to get that close to the bride and see the detail in the left finger where her ring is going to go and how it compares to the rest of the fingers, for example. Or just the way she holds her hand on her hip, or the way she holds a garter in her hands. Same thing holds true with little children's hands when they're playing with a block or they're playing with their favorite toy. And to get zoomed in really close on their hands tells so much about the picture. And if you're focusing on the details, like the wedding date inside the wedding ring, that's something that nobody would ever see once it's placed on the groom's finger, but it's something everyone would love to see. So being very aware of the details, no matter what you're shooting, is one of the best skills that you can add to your photo briefcase.
And I just wanted to pause for a minute and talk about equipment, because while a lot of what we're talking about does involve these big cameras that you see us carrying around, we have done work with GoPros. I love shooting on a phone. You can see the picture of phone that I was actually using. Someone took a picture of me using my phone at an event. We even worked with a drone recently. It's super fun to get drone footage. So definitely don't feel like you have to have a really expensive DSLR camera to accomplish these things. In fact, I love when people say they want to brag about the expensive camera they have. If you're using an expensive camera, but it's always on auto, there's really no point. But if you learn these fundamentals and you learn how to shoot on manual and you practice, you can take a great picture with just about any camera.
You know, that brings me to tell you about, don't get caught up in the brand of camera that you're using, because I started out with, I actually have used everything, Yashica, Minolta, Canon, Pentax, and now I have a Sony A9. But I also have a Nikon D700, and I gave Stephanie my Canon 5D Mark II, and she added to that suite.
And you got your Sony.
Yeah, I said that. But the point of it is, especially the older you get, you need to be able to go from one format to another, one kind of camera to another, one phone from one style.
One Android to an iPhone.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephanie has an Android and I have an iPhone. And it's okay. It's actually benefits you to be versed in how to use all of these screens and read your instruction manual and learn how to use the equipment you have before you to its full capacity. On the other hand, if you have something very, very simple in front of you, it really is about your eye, and it's about getting down low or getting up high. It doesn't matter what the equipment is or how expensive it is necessarily. It matters whether you're able to understand light and the functions of the camera in your hands.
But you can also have a little bit of fun. We love to have a little bit of fun with night photography. In the upper right, this is the 4th of July wedding we photographed. We decided to bust out some sparklers. The bottom is a live concert photo, which we both love taking. So what are your tips for night photography?
Well, a tripod, key, number one thing you should invest in. And if you can't afford an expensive tripod, that's okay, but be aware that if you're putting a very expensive camera on a very inexpensive tripod, you're putting the camera at risk. So don't spend more on your tripod. You know what I mean? Be aware that it's risky, but it does steady your shot. If you're not liking a tripod, you can use something called a monopod, or you can brace your body against a wall or put your elbow into where the ribs and hip meet and steady your shot. But a steady shot is important so that you don't have blur in your photos. And when you're working with sparklers, you're going to have to keep the subjects, as you see here, very, very still. Hold that kiss, and then you can run around them with a sparkler. Their last name was Root, and we were actually able to write Root backwards in the shot with the sparkler.
That was a 7-second shutter speed, so they actually had to stay still for 7 seconds. And a lot of phones have night mode now. I know mine does. I love it. It's great for taking selfies in bars, but you do have to stay still for the entirety of the time that it takes to take that photo. But just have patience, and also if you have a tripod and you have a camera, a lot of cameras have either a remote or an app on your phone that you can use to trigger the camera. And sometimes using the remote or the phone is a little bit better, just because the motion from pushing down on the button to take the photo and releasing it can be just enough to jiggle the camera, give it that vibration, and you do get a little bit of blur.
The other thing I want to tell you about is this is where ISO really comes into play. If you have your ISO set on 100, it's going to take a lot longer to expose that photo. So in this case, the photo on the left, you need to crank your ISO up to 2000 or somewhere in that area. The higher you go with the ISO, the more grain you get in the photo. So you always want to have the ISO as low as you can. But if it's between having a photo that's clear and full of color, or you miss it completely, you need to go ahead and use a high ISO number.
So we talked a lot about taking pictures of other people or other things. What about taking pictures of yourself or yourself and your mom? I always feel like Jimmy Fallon when I go to take a selfie. Like I've got it down. I know what to do. Maybe not the duck lips. And then sometimes they just turn out like this. I took this picture of my dog by accident, and I just feel it's the exact feeling you get when you open your camera and you figure out it's front facing and you're like, ah. And yet some people's selfies actually look like that all the time. And there's a few reasons for that. So I want to help you nail the group selfie, and then we'll talk about your individual selfie. The group selfie, the Ussy, the Ellen photo, whatever you want to call it. Before you take a selfie or a group selfie, remind everyone where your camera is on your phone. For some people, it's on the left. Some people, it's on the lens of the camera. For some people it's on the left, some people it's on the right, some people are left-handed or right-handed, so they hold their phone differently. So I like to just grab my phone and say, all right, everyone, look right here when I hold my phone up this way. Also, if that doesn't work for you, and this works especially well for iPhones, you can tell them to look at their own face in the camera. If you're truly taking a selfie, or if your phone is faced towards you, you can see yourself on the screen. So just look at yourself. And then if that doesn't work, try the timer. Especially if you're having trouble hitting the button and keeping your photo in focus, give yourself a 3-second timer, hold your phone up, and take your selfie. However, some people might be like my mom with tiny little T-Rex arms. My arms are very long.
Mine are.
Hers are not. And so I want to give you some tips for taking a great selfie if you have tiny little T-Rex arms. First of all, try the timer. Again, even for yourself. Also, please do not ask a stranger to take your photo. Whether this is a photo of you on a solo vacation or even you and a group of friends, people are terrible and they will steal your phone and run off with it. And I know it seems like a nice thing to do, but it's just not worth the risk. And it's even more true if you're using an expensive camera. But also phones are pretty expensive at this point. Do, however, balance it on literally anything. Lean it against a book, a board game. I'm sure you can find something. Or if all else fails, get one of these handy little guys, a gorilla tripod. You can wrap it around a railing or something, a tree even, and have your cute little digital camera like this or your phone ready to go to take that selfie. The reason this is so important is because incorrect distance can actually create distortion. And some people call this lens distortion, but when you're on a phone and you're taking selfies, it is literally distance distortion. This is a picture of the exact same person taking a photo much closer and much farther away from themselves and cropping it to be about the same size. And you can see how things get so distorted when you get closer to the lens. So let's talk a little bit about editing apps. Once you get that perfect photo or as close to it as you want, you might want to play with it a little, make it trendy, maybe make it a little bit brighter and less saturated so you can add text over top of it and you can read that text. So here's some of my favorite apps. First, Unfold and Story Art are fantastic for creating cool Instagram stories. They have backgrounds, frames, little boxes preset where you can add text. Super fun, a lot of free versions, and then you can buy little $1 or $2 add-ons if you want to add additional elements. These ones up at the top from the left to right, PicMonkey, Pixlr, and A Color Story are also great. You love PicMonkey. Why do you love PicMonkey so much?
I love PicMonkey because it allows you to clone out things you don't want in the photo. That's probably one of the most difficult things to do as a beginner, and it's a little harder to do in Photoshop. So PicMonkey is an excellent way to do that at a low cost, or free maybe.
Yeah, for instance, we took a picture walking down the beach, and we had this bride and groom walking down the beach as well, and a bunch of people had walked, and I just took a nice smooth piece of sand and cloned it over all of the footsteps, and voila, we had a clean beach with just one set of footsteps. Pixlr and A Color Story are great. They have lots of little elements you can edit with, and then Photoshop and Lightroom do have mobile apps. If you're familiar with actual Photoshop and Lightroom, they're great. Otherwise, they're kind of overwhelming. I don't recommend starting with those.
Yeah, me neither.
And PhotoGrid is a great collage app. It's my favorite one. It's simple. You can remove the watermark if you want. Super easy. But my favorite one of all is Snapseed. Snapseed is this awesome photo editing app. It's available for iPhones and Androids. It has all sorts of little elements. You can actually pinpoint specific parts of the photo that you want to burn or dodge. So you want to make it a little bit brighter or a little bit darker. You can crop, edit, rotate, do just about anything you need in this app. I actually have all of these downloaded on my phone. It depends on my mood and what I want to edit, but Snapseed's definitely my go-to.
The other thing too is if you're not used to using a desktop or a laptop, it's probably better to do your photo editing on a laptop or a desktop. It's hard to do it on a handheld phone. The scale is wrong. And if you plan on using it in a bigger format, you really need to do it on a desktop.
Yeah. Now, if you're going for Instagram stories,
then not.
Phone's the way to go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're almost up on the time here before we take some questions. But if we leave you with just one thing that we've learned in our combined 60-something years of experience.
It's shoot both ways. I can't tell you how many times over the past 40 years that I've routinely done this, and somebody would say, I love that photo, but I need it in a vertical format, or vice versa. And so if you're used to shooting with your cell phone, you might always do vertical shots, or if you're primarily in the Instagram. But it's really to your benefit to shoot it both ways. And for future use is one, but also giving you the crop capability in post-production. So that's the one technique that I would say, take the extra time. It doesn't take that much longer to shoot the photo the other way. Go horizontal and vertical. You'll be happy down the road.
You never know what you might want to use those photos for. My LaCroix has been sitting on these coasters. Remember that Silky water photo? Or me in front of the frozen waterfall?
Yeah.
You just never know what you're going to want to put your photos on. So give yourself the option to have that versatility. And thank you so much for hanging out with us today and learning a little bit about photography. Hopefully it was helpful, and we could take some questions if you'd like. Let's see. So flash on a phone. I love that question because I literally couldn't tell you the last time I used the flash on my phone. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, fill flash is one of the reasons why you'd want to use a flash on a phone. If you're in a place where the people's eyes are not lit, like in a restaurant, that's a prime example, low light, and you just need a little pop of light to make their faces look better and less grainy. So those are two reasons and times when I would highly recommend turning on your flash. The other time is if you're outdoors in what is every photographer's nightmare, and that is dappled light. You've got part shadow, part sun, and you want to even out the light. So if you turn on the flash and you fill in with flash, it evens it out, and then you have a much better photo. A lot of people don't even think of using their flash in the daytime, but that's the prime example of when you would.
Yeah. So Nina said, do you have any best practices when it comes to photo cropping? Just some simple things. We always love to say don't crop out people's feet, but definitely don't crop people at the knees. We see this a lot, and it has a really weird effect on how a person actually looks like a person. Also, don't crop out people's heads. There's a reason I'm sitting here and not here.
Well, it's a trend now to cut people's heads off and cut them off at the knees. I just don't like that trend because it's a part of a whole that you don't want. If you wanted to show their eyes and nose to give a feeling of emotion, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. But to just not be cognizant of where you're cropping, I think that's the most important thing. So once again, if you shoot it right, you shoot it from a distance, fine, take that shot, and then go in and get your tight shot. Then down the road, you'll have both options at your fingertips.
And then my other recommendation for cropping is crop with the rule of thirds in mind. Sometimes I take a picture and I just center what I want, but I know that I'm going to zoom in and crop later. And I'll even use that Instagram grid that pops up to just crop where I want my photo to be. So just have fun with it. Be creative. Val said, any suggestions on photographing my dogs? Have treats available. Treats work great. I also love if there's a phrase that you know gets your dog excited and gets them to smile. For my dog, fortunately she's not here right now, so this is not teasing her. I'll say, do you wanna, because I know she knows I'm gonna say go for a walk. If I really need a photo of her smiling, like on her birthday, I'll put some dumb hat on her and she's already pissed at me, and I'll say, do you wanna, and she will immediately smile. So get that phrase that makes your dog happy, or if they don't have one, you can teach them a cute phrase like say cheese, and when you do that, actually give them a treat and start to reward them for getting excited when you say cheese, and then your dog's trained to take some cute portraits.
The other things I use with photo for children and pets are little squeaky toys or rattles, bells, things that make noise, but you got to keep them kind of concealed until right before you want to use them. Mm-hmm. And then you can hold it up. Now with small children, I love holding up Twix. That really gets a good smell.
Yeah, Kit Kats would
Kit Kats, anything that their mom says they can have, which I usually ask ahead of time. But, you just want to spur their interest right when you're ready to take the photo. So you got to keep that under wraps. And you can also use puppets with children. But mainly it's the noisemakers that work the best.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Rob, and then Paul, I want to get to your question too. Rob says, how about adding light when you're shooting into the sun? Is it just one f-stop? What do you do?
Well, compensating turnaround. That's what I recommend. And yet we were photographing the wedding party in Mexico, and they wanted the ocean behind them. And the only way to do it was to shoot into the sun. So you really need to be aware of your subject matter and expose for them, mm-hmm. not the sunlight behind them, mm-hmm. but the subjects themselves.
And that is where that post photo editing really might come into play. For instance, that beach wedding, I was bracketing while we were shooting the wedding. There was a good 10 minutes where they were saying vows, and frankly, every photo was going to look the same. And so I started taking one on F2, F3, F4, F5, F6, F7, F8, and then I backed down 7 all the way down to 2. That way I had everything to work with. I knew one of them was going to be good. And then I went into Lightroom after, and in some cases just made the ocean a little more blue to where it was in the one where the ocean looked natural, but I made their faces a little bit whiter in the ones where their faces looked more natural. It's kind of strike that natural balance.
Right. And one more thing on shooting into the sun, you can often get a lens flare, which are these little circles of light that come from refraction. And sometimes that's a wonderful effect. And on other times, it's not something you want. So by tilting your camera up or down, you can get rid of lens glare. You can get rid of sun flare. It's just being aware of the light around you and slightly altering the way you're looking at it, your angle, or shooting up or down, depending on where the sunlight is.
And if you are going to take a DSLR into the sun, make sure you get a UV filter for your lens as well.
Always a good practice.
Paul, video, always landscape or shoot both ways? This is an awesome question because we're all doing more video, or we definitely should be. And that's a whole separate class. But what I can tell you is if you haven't checked out Quibi yet, that's Quibi. It's a new video streaming platform. They do 10-minute episodes of shows called Quick Bites, shortened means Quibi. And it's an app you can download. Watch just one episode of a show on Quibi, and that is a lesson on how to do video right. If you're able, they actually have 2 to 6 cameras filming at all times, and they fully edited 2 versions of the show. There's a show to watch it horizontally on your phone in landscape mode, and then if you tip your phone portrait ways and you want to watch holding your phone the way you normally hold the phone vertically, there's a version there. And in that, if there are 2 people sitting side by side like we are, in the vertical version, they're actually stacked individual faces, one over the other. And if you turn your phone, you'll see it revert back to the normal interview where they're sitting side by side. So they actually edited 2 full versions. Now, if you're talking about video for a commercial or something, that's going to depend on the format, where it's going. If you're talking about video for social media, that's a whole other ballgame. I would say give yourself flexibility. So maybe zoom out a little bit and position your subjects where they have a lot of headspace so that you have that room to crop into a square for Instagram or whatever you need to do for the final use of the video.
In my world, I am straight horizontal because when you're using different mediums, I absolutely know that my video always has to be horizontal.
Yeah, she's got a lot that would go on YouTube, for instance, whereas I'm shooting a lot of time for Instagram stories, so that's going to be vertical. All right, any other questions before we wrap up? Got a minute or 2 more? I think we're good.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us, guys.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, Kathy and Stephanie, thank you so much. I personally learned a ton. I think sometimes just reiterating the basics are always a great way to go. If anybody who dialed in today or even watches this after the fact has a question for either of you, what's the best way that they can follow up if you're willing to disclose?
Yeah, well, our website's CathyCasstevensPhoto.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook. What do you prefer? Yeah, Instagram. Kathy Casstevens Photo on Instagram too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you ladies both again so very much for joining us on YOUniverse today. We might have to get a second installment around video going. I don't know if you just volunteered yourself or not, but
I have some great people on my team who can do that.
Awesome. So we're gonna